Hello, my friendly little buggers. Welcome back to the Overclock Workshop, the series where we take things in Deep Rock that may or may not already have overclocks and give them more overclocks, or give them overclocks from the ground up. Although it has somewhat strayed from that purpose. Pretty much as soon as I got to the tools, I sort of looked at the feedback, not just from Tyler, but also just from Ghost Ship Games themselves. And, you know, their sort of aversion to adding overclocks for traversal support tools. Not necessarily grenades, that could still happen, but Tyler really hates that idea. But either way, I've begun to view this series more as presenting ideas for things that I would like to see on these tools and grenades, whether that be through overclocks, or through upgrades, or through mechanics simply added to the tools in the first place. Although I have, these ideas are all pre-made, aside from that context. Which is why some of them really are overclocks. In fact, you'll see that today. One of these, I think, really won't work unless it's an overclock. And I do understand the devs' reasons for not wanting to add overclocks to these things. I think there are a lot of significant workarounds where you can add a lot of interesting mechanics to these tools and still have them fit with people's expectations of the classes. I think it is very possible. I think there are actually better methods of doing this, that being through a subclass mechanic. But either way, here we are. We've also made sort of the executive decision where I would do these on my own. It sort of just streamlines the whole ordeal, makes it a hell of a lot less awkward because Tyler doesn't really believe in these in principle, which is understandable, and thus he's also not willing to make any contributions, which is also understandable. So it can not only be far shorter, but it can also be more centered on my own ideas and me explaining them, rather than having someone here who doesn't have their own ideas to present and who would also just rib me for my ideas because they are probably stupid. Either way, today we're looking at Scout's flare gun. Overclocks that I would like to see added to it, or if it got overclocks, what those overclocks I would like to be, but also just mechanics that could be added to it in some way. Some of these are more on principle than others, some of these are direct. And I say some of these considering, there's only 3 in total, one of each category. There's no some of these, but one of these is, let's just get into it. Basically, what I mean is this one. Clean Overclock, Dwarf Sense, periodically releases a long-range pulse that highlights enemies and minerals. As Stuart Woodall said, mining is like a search and destroy mission. Basically, this is the kind of thing that I would like to see, not necessarily folded in as a mechanic, but absolutely as an upgrade for the flare gun, as it is. As in, the next two cannot be added as upgrades directly, I don't think. This one, I think, absolutely can be. I think the utility here is pretty obvious, especially from a clean overclock, Any, drawbacks might be, difficult to justify, but at the same time, they probably wouldn't be, considering the flare gun isn't a combat tool anyway. I think this utility would probably be taken over a lot of other things, including ammo and flare lifetime. I think people would probably rather have this, but at the same time it might actually become a little bit too powerful, So I guess it depends on how periodically we want this pulse to be. But overall, I think this will really aid Scout's role as a support class, and I think it gives the flare guns a combat utility that is inherent to them already, which is sort of just cleaning up lines of sight, making the arena more clear. In this case, we actually have enemies being highlighted, which means we'll be able to identify where enemies are even outside of our immediate combat zone. And the same goes for the minerals. Now, I suppose a really good argument is, because personally what I believe should be done is that all pieces of equipment in the game should be brought up to 5 tiers of upgrades. So this would actually make sense to me as occupying a new tier where you would choose between the two, possibly have a third one that does something else, possibly one of the other overclocks I've got. That to me is actually the ideal way of doing it, because I really do sincerely believe that all equipment items, all support tools, traversal tools, the pickaxes, the armor rig, everything that already has upgrades should be brought up to 5 tiers total, especially considering there is an inconsistency. For example, Driller's tools all have 4 tiers at least, whereas something like the platform gun only has 3. and the flare gun only has 3 as well. So you could easily have this be, you could split this in 2 and make that the 4th tier of the flare gun's modifications. I think that's a really good way of going about it. So yeah, that's Dwarf Sense. I think I've explained the utility well, and I've explained the implementation pretty seamlessly. I personally believe in it. Let me know what you think. Moving on. Light switch. Last one out, get the lights. Now, this goes into the realm of combat function more than combat utility, you know. Essentially turning the flare gun into a fire grenade. Electrocuting an embedded flare, as in embedded in the ground, will cause it to explode, dealing a large amount of fire damage and stunning nearby enemies, with a 3.8 meter radius, dealing 100 fire damage and heat with a 4-second stun. With reduced ammo capacity, and also flares cannot be detonated when depleted, as in, if it's died out, you can't use it. So, how do I explain this exactly? It started off out as, well, the flare gun does damage, first of all, but it's not useful as a combat tool. It's not useful as a weapon. And that's because it's not a weapon. But what if it was in some way, right? So light switch sort of started out as just, you shoot flare and it will explode. Probably being a basic explosive damage explosion, or the one I've got listed here. The electrocution wasn't a part of it. The electrocution is there sort of to complicate it in a way, but also Scout has a lot of ways of using electricity, and I really want to push that ownership that Scout has over electricity. You know, electricity is sort of, it is arguably the weakest damage over time effect in the game. You know, you look at something like explosive chemical bolts, where it is slower, but it lasts so long and has that other effect to accompany it. So I just want to, you know, Scout makes the best use of electricity overall. You know, you get some of the best electric upgrades in the game. I'd say the only competitor really is Electric Trail on the coil gun. But Scout has, you know, electric reload. He has what the Zukovs have, with plenty of electricity bonuses that you can get through Bullets of Mercy. The Zukovs and the Bolt Shark have them built in. You have electrocuting focus shots, which, yeah, that's pretty bad. The Drak also has a built-in electricity upgrade, and you also have taser bolts, you also have IFGs and stun sweepers. Plenty of sources of electricity. So this wouldn't actually be hard to activate, and I think that's very fair. And I also think it doesn't entirely go against what you would expect from the flare gun. I feel like if someone shoots a flare at the ground, it might, during the middle of a swarm, it might come off as slightly confusing to other players. But if you have some kind of visual distinction to show that it's a light switch flare, as in it would explode, possibly have it spraying out sparks of electricity, pardon me, or just having some clear visual difference, and then players would see that when the Scout electrocutes it, or when they electrocute it even, because other players would be able to do this, you would see that happen, and then this sort of idea would spread. And, you know, people who don't have this overclock would end up knowing about it anyway, because they would see it in action, or they would see posts about it on the Reddit. The word would get out that this thing kind of exists. At the same time, even though that's sort of my reasoning for how overclocks can be added to tools, I know that's not going to happen still. So I kind of need to focus on how this could be implemented not as an overclock. And in my opinion, the best way to go about this would be to greatly minimise the strength of this effect, possibly removing the fire aspect altogether, possibly have it be a very weak explosion. You know, the flare gun deals 40 direct damage, possibly have the explosion deal 80 damage, and have it accompany a stun, and it's something you can always do. Maybe it's built into the flare gun itself, or possibly as the third upgrade in the modification tier that this would be added to, the new 4th tier, or even 5th tier. At the same time, I can see if you minimise these effects enough, and still have it be only activated through electrocution, possibly also ignition, because that would allow the Drak to do it without needing to use the electricity upgrade. It would also allow you to do it with the boomstick. At the same time, if you allowed fire to activate these effects, it might be all too common, and you'd be running into people activating it by accident. You know, any driller with a flamethrower, a lot of minigun and hurricane builds, a lot of engineer secondary builds as well. And maybe keep it to electricity, but I think if you minimise these effects enough, you could have this built into the flare gun as something that it can just do. And I don't think that would break Scout necessarily. I think the only reason maybe that's unwise is because we have the stun sweeper functioning as your stun grenade. Which is why I think folding this into the flare gun, like as a inherent ability, is possibly too far. I think perhaps a good workaround would be if you minimize these effects to a certain extent and have it be a 5th tier upgrade for the flare gun that competes with this in a whole. Don't split this one in two. Have this be one of the upgrades and have a weaker version of this be the other upgrade. And then it's either combat utility or combat function. You choose between the two. I think that works for me. I would like to know what people think about something like this, whether they can see it functioning, or whether they can see it being added not as an overclock, if that's even possible. Where I would say that's not possible, though, is actually the next one. So let's get to that. So, here's the unstable, Eye of the Storm. Now, I would admit, this is actually inspired by something I saw a long time ago, and it is also very similar to that thing I saw. Someone presented an idea from a flare gun overclock. I think it was called Eye of Magnus. I hope it wasn't called Eye of the Storm, because otherwise I'm in trouble. I'm gonna get plagiarism strike. Either way, I was really taken by the idea, and I wanted to turn it into something that I could see being added. That was when I believed more in traversal tool overclocks than I do now, or in equipment overclocks than I do now. And I don't see this being added really outside of overclocks, and we know we're not going to get those, or at least it's very, very unlikely. It's like a 98% chance, I'd say, probably higher, that we're not going to get traversal and support tool overclocks. It's also one that'd be very hard to make it work, because while you would be able to visually distinguish it, I suppose I should read the effects. Increases movement speed and jump height while in flare radius, while decreasing enemy movement speed. But it has a much smaller effect radius that also greatly restricts illumination effect, as well as reduced magazine capacity and velocity, and reduce the lifetime. The first penalty is very important, because you have a smaller illumination radius of the flare, but it's also limited to that. So it would be almost like a ring. Like, picture, the easiest example is, I guess picture an IFG. It'll be bigger than an IFG, right? But it's a fixed radius. It doesn't produce any light outside of that, but that's also to indicate what it really does. I feel like maybe that's where I'm hurting myself with this, because if it didn't have that, it could still function as a normal flare, just with these added bonuses. And I feel like people would appreciate that. I feel like in the context of the flare gun, people aren't, especially your teammates, aren't going to be missing the fact that your flares are shot at a lower velocity, or that they last maybe even half a minute shorter of a time than normal. I feel like they won't bat an eye, but they will bat an eye at the bonuses that they're getting from this. The fact that their movement speed and jump height is increased, and it slows down enemies as well. I think that utility is very interesting. I think when you think about it really, it almost makes a bit more sense to actually be something for the IFG. Yeah, that's the thing. So I think when it comes to implementing these mechanics, you need to be a bit more broad, or, to stop myself from abandoning them, I need to be a bit more, think outside the box maybe. So it would actually make a bit more sense to me as potentially an IFG upgrade or overclock, or possibly something folded into the IFG in general, that you move faster while in an IFG. I think as it stands, that would be fine, especially when you consider the small size of an IFG's radius. I think it would work in that sense. And this might not work, especially if we're not reducing the amount of ammo you have. I would admit though, this started off a lot more extreme. It actually had a mechanic where it would accelerate the heating and cooling of enemies and dwarves, which was kind of ridiculous. And I'm glad that I dropped that. At the same time, it's still not exactly implementable as is. So I might as well have gone all the way, basically. So yeah, I think in a way these mechanics could be seen somewhere else, possibly on the IFG. I think a good alternative to this though, and something that I don't 100% believe in, but it's not a bad idea. And, if I were to say, do this. If I were to show you something like this, which I just made, Campfire, where it'd actually be something that, basically extrapolated from the Terraria Campfire, where it would slowly restore your health over time. Obviously, it would be limited by a limited duration, as well as the further penalties we put on that, as well as the effect radius, and it would even go further as to restore enemy health as well. So it's something that you would have to play around, like you'd have to play around it, you know. But even then, something like this, I feel like that's where sort of Ghost Ship's issues with support tool and traversal tool overclocks come in, where you have something like most players aren't necessarily going to expect that your flare gun is going to heal enemies, you know. But if you can find a way to implement a player healing mechanic into the flare gun, no one's going to really bat an eye as long as it's still a flare, as long as it still does what it does, but it just with some more like utilitarian limitations in exchange for a healing effect. I think that would be more appreciated than confounding. I think Ghost Ship, and I think this is just to show Ghost Ship are overestimating the damage that will be done by overclocks being added to support and traversal tools. Maybe that's because they don't see a way of doing it without going too far, but I think there are sincere workarounds that can apply to this concept, such as simply making the overclocks keep the tool close enough to its original form, as well as clear visual distinctions that over time people would learn and come to not necessarily expect, but understand when they see it and understand the differences. And even then, you would keep the differences minimal and arguably try and keep the base function of the tool 100% of the time anyway. So I don't know if this necessarily demonstrated that. I think this arguably suits the flare gun more than Eye of the Storm. Like I said, I think partially some of these mechanics could be translated onto the IFG, possibly as an overclock for that, or just by default. But this, to me, is something that I could see more so as an upgrade. If you wanted to make a 5th tier or a 4th tier of flare gun modifications out of this, you would have this as it is. You would have this, but minimized somewhat, maybe half from at most. And then you would also have this, possibly quite very, very weak, and you would still maybe want it to reduce the duration somehow, even though I know that they're not a fan of necessarily having drawbacks on gear modifications. And obviously you wouldn't have it heal enemies either. But I think there is potential here. And that's really my point. You know, I think what I want to do sort of with these videos is show mechanics that I really want to see added to these tools, but also hopefully as a side effect demonstrate how support and traversal tool and grenade overclocks are feasible. I know in some cases, say with Eye of the Storm, or possibly even Light Switch, it could do the opposite, but I hope that my sincerity in explaining how, you know, there is arguably a required alternate method of implementation, I hope that sort of levels out the ludicrousness of the ideas and makes the overall concept of adding clocks or just adding these mechanics to support and traversal tools more attractive to Ghost Ship. Not necessarily that I'm expecting them to watch this. Either way, that's all I've got for today. So next week, the schedule that we're sort of running on at the moment is pretty hard to pin down, especially when it comes to Tuesday and Wednesday, because every other Tuesday I'll do one of these, and then every other Wednesday I'll do a build showcase, which will eventually become Overclock reviews. It's a gameplay focused video basically, but at the same time, on the weeks where I do a gameplay video on Tuesday, Tyler might be doing a video of his own on Tuesday or possibly Monday. I basically given him Monday to have free reign over, you know, while I'm attending university. I'm not free on Mondays at the moment, so that'll be the case for that. So I'm not really sure how to pin down the schedule in a helpful way, but I think that helps to explain what's going on. Either way, if you did enjoy this, next time on the Overclock Workshop will actually be the platform gun. We're moving into the traversal tools now, and I think I've got some pretty interesting stuff there. Something that you definitely expect, possibly two things that you definitely expect, but I think I've done them in a way that is more reasonable in Ghost Ship's eyes, I should say. So either way, if you did enjoy this, please make sure to, you know, do all that stuff, you know. I know what I should say. What I should say is, if you'd like to see more overclocks for traversal and support tools, then leave a like and hit that notification bell, all that that stupid shit. I will say that if you enjoyed this, please make sure to like and subscribe, and comment which of these ideas you liked, if you think any of them are feasible, any of your own ideas, if you please, or any feedback whatsoever is appreciated. You guys are the best, genuinely. I'm not going to make this double-edged. I think it's really cool how far we've gotten by just hitting hard and just having an output, like a very consistent, frequent output. How far we've come just by doing that and not trying all that hard. I don't know if we particularly deserve it, but thank you guys. Thank you so much. Anyway, see you next time. I'll see you for a stream tomorrow, actually. Yeah, thanks guys. See you next time.